My phone lit up the nightstand at 3:30 in the morning, and the words on that screen changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. My name is Josephine Bellamy. I am 67 years old. I have lived in the same brick house in Orange Mound, Memphis, Tennessee for 39 years. I raised my daughter in this house. I buried my mother from this house. I have seen hard things come and go through this neighborhood, and I have never once run from any of them. But nothing prepared me for what I read that morning. Grandma helped me. Stepdad hit me and locked me in the basement. Please come. My granddaughter Destiny, 15 years old, sending me those words at 3:30 in the morning from a basement she could not get out of. I called her back before I was fully upright. It rang 4 times and went to nothing. I called my daughter Kezia's number next, straight to voicemail. I stood in my bedroom in the dark for exactly 3 seconds. And then I moved. I dressed without turning on a light. Jeans, a blouse, flat shoes. I grabbed my purse from the chair by the door and my keys from the hook on the wall. And then I did something I had not done in 5 years of bad feelings and unanswered questions. I reached behind the back door and I picked up the baseball bat I keep there. Not as a weapon, as a boundary. There is a difference, and I knew it that morning, even if my hands were shaking. Inside my purse was a key Kezia gave me 3 years ago and never asked back for. In 3 years, I had never once used it without calling first. I had respected her marriage. I had respected her space. I had swallowed things that should not have been swallowed and told myself a daughter's household was a daughter's business. I was done swallowing. The drive from Orange Mound to Kezia's apartment was 20 minutes in the dark. 20 minutes on empty Memphis streets with nothing but streetlights and everything I had been trying not to know, pressing itself flat against the inside of my chest. I thought about the afternoon 2 years ago when I came to visit and Destiny flinched. Darnell had walked into the room behind her and her whole body pulled inward, just for a second, just small enough that Kezia didn't see it. But I saw it. I wrote it down that night when I got home. I thought about the bruise on Destiny's arm last spring, a long yellow-green mark above her elbow. Before I could finish asking about it, Kezia said she fell in gym class and moved the conversation somewhere else entirely. I thought about the afternoon I sat at Kezia's kitchen table and told her plainly, I am worried about that man. And Kezia looked at me with something tired and certain in her eyes and said, Mama, you don't know what you're talking about. And I thought about a name I did not say out loud. Leroy Mercer, my ex-husband, Kezia's father, the first man in this family who was handed grace he had not earned and took it without a second look back. The thought of him moved through me like a cold draft under a door, and I pushed it away. I don't cry when things are serious. Never have. Tears are for after. After you have done what needs doing, after the dust settles, after the people who needed protecting are safe. That morning, in that car, I was not there yet. If you are watching this and you have ever felt something coming before it arrived, stay with me. Because what I found when I got to that apartment building that night is something I have never told anyone fully. Until now. Every light in that building was on. I pulled into the parking lot. I turned off the engine. I sat for one breath, just one. And then I picked up that bat, got out of my car, and walked toward that door. The key went in clean. I did not knock. The door swung open and I caught the last half second of what was happening inside. Darnell's head thrown back, laughing at something on the television. Kezia turned toward him with her legs folded under her on the couch. A Saturday night scene. Comfortable. Ordinary. My granddaughter had been in that basement for hours. Darnell's laugh died the moment he registered the open door. He looked up at me without alarm, almost amused, the way a man looks when he has already decided he can handle whatever just walked in. He had that look on his face before I had even fully crossed the threshold. I noted it. I filed it. I kept moving. Kezia stood up from the couch. She did not come toward me. She did not speak. She just stood there in the middle of her own living room, looking cornered inside her own life. I did not greet either of them. I said one thing: "Where is my granddaughter?" And I was already moving before the words finished leaving my mouth. I had seen the basement door from the entrance. What I had not expected was the hardware on it. A slide bolt. New. I had been inside that apartment dozens of times over the years, and I knew that bolt had not always been there. The kind of bolt you do not install for storage. The kind you install when you want a door to stay shut. I forced it. The basement was dark. It took my eyes 2 seconds to find her. Destiny was in the far corner, on the concrete floor, knees pulled to her chest, her phone still in her hand. She looked up at me, and something in her face broke open the way things break when the thing you have been waiting for finally arrives. Her wrists were red, raw lines across both of them from pulling at that door. Her eyes were so swollen they were nearly shut. And she was shaking. Not the shaking of someone who has just been frightened, but the deep, involuntary trembling of a body that has been shaking for so long it forgot how to stop. I sat down on that concrete floor and I held her. I did not say anything. I just held her until the trembling slowed. Then I did something else. I took out my phone. I photographed the bolt on the basement door. I photographed the marks on Destiny's wrists. I photographed the room exactly as I found it. I did not announce it. I did not ask permission. I simply recorded what was in front of me. Then I brought her upstairs. Darnell was standing by the time we came up. He had repositioned himself, closer to the center of the room, relaxed, measured. His voice when he spoke was the voice of a man presenting a reasonable argument to a reasonable woman. "This is a family matter," he said. "She was being disciplined. You don't understand what goes on in this house." Every word came out smooth, no stumbling, no heat. He had said something like this before in some form to someone. I could hear the practice in it. I did not look at him. I looked at Kezia. She was still standing where she had been standing when I came through the door. She had not moved toward Destiny. She had not moved toward me. She stood in the exact center of her living room with her arms at her sides, looking at her daughter and her mother in the same glance, and she did not choose either one of us. I have 2 voices. Most people who know me have only ever heard one of them. Kezia has heard the other exactly twice in her life, both times at moments she has never recovered from quickly. When I spoke, it was that voice, quiet, certain, finished. "You'll hear from me." I walked out with Destiny. I did not look back at Darnell. I did not wait for Kezia to respond. What I said was not a threat, and it was not a warning. It was a statement of what had already been decided inside me before I ever put that key in the lock. We were in the car and 2 blocks away before Destiny spoke. Her voice was small and careful, the voice of someone testing whether it was safe to say a thing out loud. "Grandma." A pause. "I called my father." My hands tightened on the wheel. The emergency room at 4:30 in the morning is its own kind of world. Fluorescent lights over plastic chairs. A television mounted in the corner with the volume off. 3 other people waiting, none of them looking at each other, the way people don't when they are each carrying something private. I had not brought Destiny here because her injuries demanded it. I had brought her here because I needed a record, a physician's notes, a documented account of what she looked like and what she said on this specific night. I had been writing things in a notebook for 5 years. Tonight, I needed something with a hospital letterhead. The intake nurse was efficient and kind. She took Destiny back within 20 minutes. I sat in the waiting area with my purse on my lap and my hands folded on top of it, and I breathed. That was when the ER doors opened and a man walked in. He went straight to the nurse's desk. He was not disheveled, he was not frantic. He had on dark pants and a gray pullover, and he moved with the particular stillness of someone who had spent the drive over getting himself under control. He said something to the nurse, and she gestured down the corridor. Then he turned. He saw me, before I spoke. We looked at each other across that waiting room, and I cannot tell you exactly what passed between us in those few seconds, except that it was heavy, and it was old, and it had the specific weight of things that have been left unsaid for 15 years. I knew who he was before he said his name. The shape of his face was the same shape I had been looking at in Destiny's face since she was born. Franklin Stokes. He walked over and sat down across from me. Not beside me, across from me. He understood without being told that this was not a moment for proximity. From the corridor, Destiny had appeared in the doorway of the examination area. A nurse had stepped out momentarily, and Destiny had followed. She stood there watching him, this man who had her last name and her cheekbones and 15 years of absence between them. She did not move toward him. She just watched, the way you watch something you have been told your whole life not to want. Franklin did not perform for her. He glanced at her once, long enough to let her know he had seen her, and then he looked back at me. He gave her room. That meant something, though I was not ready to say what. He said, "I want to know what happened to my daughter tonight." He paused. "And then I want to know everything else. No groveling, no demands. Just a man sitting in a plastic chair at 4:30 in the morning asking to be told the truth." I studied him for a long moment. In the examination room down the hall, a physician was documenting the red marks on my granddaughter's wrists and the account she was giving of a locked basement door. That report would matter later. I knew it even then. I was not ready for the conversation Franklin was asking for. But I recognized that it needed to happen, and I was the only one in that room who could start it. I opened my mouth to speak. My phone rang. I looked down at the screen. Kezia. I watched it ring twice, 3 times, 4. Then it stopped. I set the phone face down on the chair beside me, and I looked back at Franklin. Something had settled in me during those 4 rings. A question had surfaced that I should have asked years ago and hadn't. And I was not going to begin this conversation without answering it first. "Before I tell you anything," I said, "I need you to tell me something first." I held his eyes. "How long have you been paying for this child?" Franklin did not hesitate. He pulled out his phone, opened his banking records, and turned the screen toward me. Monthly transfers. 15 years of them. Consistent. Never missed. The amounts adjusted upward twice, once when Destiny started school, once when she turned 13. The way court-ordered support adjusts when a child's needs grow. He scrolled without speaking. I read without speaking. Then he opened another screen. A notes application with a list of dates and short entries. Called. No answer. June 14th. Birthday card returned. October 3rd. Called twice. Voicemail full. February 9th. Entries going back to when Destiny was 2 years old. Years earlier, after access to Destiny became increasingly difficult, an attorney had advised him to document every attempt to reach her. He had followed that advice the way some men follow instructions for survival, carefully, consistently, without ever assuming he would need it. I handed the phone back to him. I did not perform shock. I did not cover my mouth or look away. I sat with what I was seeing the way I have learned to sit with hard things. Directly, without flinching, without rushing toward the comfort of moving past it. What I was understanding in that moment was not only what Franklin had done, it was what I had not done. Kezia had told me Franklin walked away. She had said it the way she said things she needed to be true, firmly, without room for questions. And I had let it stand. Not because I believed it without reservation, because challenging it would have cost me something I was not prepared to spend. Pushing on Franklin meant pushing on Kezia. And pushing on Kezia, during those years when her marriage was the thing she was holding on to most tightly, meant risking the distance between us growing into something permanent. So I chose the easier thing. I told myself it was her household and her child, and her business. I wrote things in my journal, and I kept my opinions measured, and I protected the relationship I had with my daughter by staying quiet about the one she was destroying with her own. And Destiny grew up believing her father had chosen to disappear. She grew up with that as a fact about herself, that she was someone a parent could leave without looking back. She carried that the way children carry things they are given before they are old enough to question them. I sat with that. I made myself stay inside it instead of moving on. It joined the entry about the locked room. The bruise explained away before I could finish my question. The kitchen table conversation Kezia ended before it started. All the things I had written down and then folded my hands over. A woman who kept records of what she saw but did not always act on what she recorded. Destiny was down the hall. She did not know this conversation was happening. Before this night was over, I was going to have to decide how to tell her. Not tonight. She had been through enough tonight. But soon, and fully, and without softening it into something easier to carry than the truth. My phone rang again. Kezia. This time I answered. She did not ask how Destiny was. The first words out of her mouth were, "Mama, you need to come back here so we can talk about this before it goes any further. Not, is she hurt? Not, where are you? Before it goes any further." I understood exactly where Kezia was standing in that apartment. I understood who was standing next to her while she made that call. I understood what she was being asked to help contain. "I'll be in touch," I said, and I ended the call. I looked at Franklin. He had been watching my face the whole time. He had not asked a single question during the call. That restraint told me something about him that the payment records hadn't. "I need to make one more call," I said, "and then things are going to move fast." I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring. I gave her everything she needed in the order she needed it. The address, the name, Darnell Pruitt, the nature of the incident, a minor held against her will in a locked basement, my name, my relationship to the child. I did not editorialize. I did not raise my voice. I spoke the way you speak when you have already made peace with the weight of what you are doing and you just need the words to land correctly. When I hung up, Franklin was watching me with an expression I could not fully read. Somewhere between relief and something heavier, the look of a man watching a door open that has been sealed for a very long time. I said, "They'll go to the apartment." He nodded. He understood what that meant for all of us. Across Memphis, at that same hour, I found myself thinking about what Darnell Pruitt was likely doing. I did not see it. I was not there, but I have lived 67 years in this world, and I have known men who operate the way he operates. Leroy Mercer taught me that lesson before Darnell Pruitt was old enough to have learned it himself. A man like Darnell does not panic when the walls start closing. Panic is for men who did not see trouble coming. Darnell had spent years managing his environment, managing Kezia, managing Destiny, managing the image he carried into that church every Sunday. The moment I walked out of that apartment with Destiny, I suspected he started recalculating, not how to escape, how to reframe. I suspected he would start making calls, not because Pastor Raymond Dawes was corrupt. I had known Raymond Dawes for years, and corruption was not his nature. But because Darnell understood that the first person to tell a story often shapes how it is heard. If I had learned anything about Darnell over the years, it was that appearances mattered to him. By 6 in the morning, I learned just how much. I was still at the hospital when my phone rang. A Memphis officer calling from Kezia's apartment. His voice was professional and careful, the voice of someone navigating something that had become more complicated than the initial report suggested. He told me Kezia was saying Destiny had not been locked in, that she had gone to the basement on her own, that this was a family disagreement that had been misunderstood. I sat very still. He told me Darnell was present in the apartment, cooperative, calm. He said the officers had documented the scene and photographed the basement door and hardware, but because Destiny was no longer at the residence and the adults present were giving a conflicting account, they needed to speak directly with the child before determining what immediate action was appropriate. I looked down the corridor toward the examination room where Destiny was. She had given the physician her account less than an hour ago. The locked door, the bolt, the hours on that concrete floor. That account was in a medical record with a timestamp. The officers did not know that yet. Kezia had made her choice. She had stood in the middle of that living room, unable to move toward either her daughter or her mother. And now, with Darnell standing somewhere behind her while she spoke to police, she had made a choice. She had chosen the side that was going to cost her the most in the end. The officer finished speaking. There was a brief silence. "Ma'am," he said, "we need to hear directly from your granddaughter as soon as possible. Right now, we're dealing with two very different versions of the same night." I kept my voice level. "Then let me bring her in." The police station smelled like burnt coffee and recycled air. We arrived just after 7 in the morning, Destiny, Franklin, and me. A child advocate was assigned within minutes, a woman with a calm face and a yellow legal pad who introduced herself quietly and took Destiny into a side room while Franklin and I waited in the corridor. I had told Destiny on the drive over that she only needed to tell the truth. Nothing more than that. Whatever she remembered, however she remembered it. The truth was enough. What came out of that room over the next hour was more than enough. The child advocate found me in the corridor when it was done. She said Destiny had provided a detailed, sequential account. Not just the previous night, but a pattern spanning 2 years. Dates. Specific incidents. A timeline she could place in order without prompting. Franklin was standing beside me when she said it. I felt him go very still. What Destiny had been doing, keeping those dates in the notes application on her phone, was not something she had planned as evidence. She had done it because writing the dates down made the incidents feel less like something she had imagined, less like something she could be talked out of. She had been quietly insisting to herself, in the only way she knew how, that what was happening to her was real. That broke something open in me that I did not have time to examine. I filed it away and kept my face steady. Then Destiny told the advocate about the sketchbooks. She described them exactly. Composition notebooks, hidden under a loose floorboard in her bedroom, drawings she had made over the past several years. The advocate documented everything. Over the next 2 days, Destiny's statement, the hospital record, photographs from the apartment, and additional investigative interviews were assembled into a formal request for a search warrant connected to the abuse investigation. The warrant was approved on the afternoon of the second day. Kezia let the officers in. The advocate told me later that she stood in the hallway without speaking while the officers went through the apartment. She did not direct them. She did not obstruct them. She simply stood there in her own apartment, watching strangers move through her household with a piece of paper that gave them the authority to search for evidence related to the allegations. They found the sketchbooks exactly where Destiny said they would be. I was not there when they carried them out, but the advocate was. She told me Darnell was in the living room when it happened. His attorney, a man named Gerald Moss, who had apparently arrived at the apartment sometime before the officers, was seated beside him. Darnell was composed. He had been composed since the moment I walked into that apartment the night before. But when the officers came out of Destiny's room with those notebooks, something moved across Darnell's face, just briefly, just around the eyes. A small fracture in the surface of a man who had believed he had accounted for everything. He had not known about the sketchbooks, whatever version of events he had been constructing since that night. Whatever story he had already started telling Pastor Dawes and his attorney and anyone else who would listen. He had built it without knowing that his stepdaughter had been drawing the truth of his household for years and hiding it under her floor. Franklin and I drove Destiny back to my house in Orange Mound that afternoon. She fell asleep in the back seat before we reached the highway. I watched her in the rearview mirror. This child who had walked into a police station and told her story without flinching. And I understood something I had not fully understood before. She had not been waiting to be rescued. She had been building toward this room for a very long time. That evening, my doorbell rang. Pastor Raymond Dawes was standing on my porch, hat in both hands, his expression carrying the particular weight of a man whose conscience had recently been disturbed. "Sister Bellamy," he said, "I think we need to talk before this goes any further." I opened the door wider. "Come in, Pastor," I said. "I've been expecting you." Pastor Raymond Dawes sat in my living room the way a man sits when he believes he is doing the right thing. Straight-backed, measured. His hat resting in both hands, his voice carrying the particular weight of a man who has spent 30 years behind a pulpit and learned how to make difficult conversations feel like pastoral care. I had known Raymond Dawes since before Kezia was grown. He had buried my mother from greater purpose. He was not a dishonest man. That was precisely what made him useful to Darnell Pruitt. He told me this was a family matter, that the church had resources, counselors, mediators, people who understood how to bring a household back together without the destruction that courts and police involvement always left behind. He said Darnell was a cornerstone of that congregation, that the boys in his mentorship program needed him, that a good man's reputation, once damaged in public, could not be fully restored even after the truth came out. He said all of it with complete sincerity. Every word. I let him finish. Then I reached for the composition notebook on the side table beside my chair, the one I had carried in my purse to the hospital the night before and brought back home this morning, and I opened it to the first marked page. I read the entry from 3 years ago aloud. The locked room, 2 days, no food. Destiny's exact words to me, recorded the same evening she said them, with the date written at the top of the page. I turned to the next marked entry and read that one too, then the next, and the next. 7 entries in sequence, each one dated, each one specific. The flinch I had witnessed, the bruise that was explained away before I could finish my sentence, the way a particular silence fell over that apartment whenever Darnell moved from one room to another. Small things that meant nothing individually and meant everything together. Pastor Dawes had stopped looking at me somewhere around the 3rd entry. By the 7th, he was staring at his hat. Then I told him about the sketchbooks. Not what was in them. I had not seen the drawings myself yet. I described them the way the child advocate had described them to me. Composition notebooks, hidden under a floorboard. Years of drawings by a 15-year-old girl who had no other place to put what she was living through. The room was very quiet when I finished. He had a granddaughter. I knew that. She was 14, 1 year younger than Destiny. I watched the moment it happened in his face. The moment Destiny stopped being a name in a situation and became a child about the age of someone he loved. Something moved through his expression that his pastoral composure could not fully contain. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't, but you know now. And what you do with that is between you and God." I did not accuse him. I did not ask him to take a side or make a promise. A man who feels cornered makes decisions from that corner. I needed Raymond Dawes to make his next decision from somewhere with more room than that. He stood. He thanked me for my time. A reflex. The kind of thing a man says when he does not know what else to say. He picked up his hat. I walked him to the door. He stopped on the threshold. "Darnell told me," he said carefully, "that Kezia was going to say the basement door was not locked, that she was going to tell the police Destiny went down there herself." He paused. "I thought you should know what's coming." He walked to his car. I stood at the closed door for a long time. The call came the next morning. The child advocate. Her voice was careful and professional, and it told me everything before she finished the sentence. Kezia had given a formal statement. She said Destiny went to the basement voluntarily. Darnell was not being held. He was home. By mid-morning, Darnell Pruitt was back in his apartment. I knew because the child advocate called to tell me. The formal statement Kezia gave had done exactly what it was designed to do. It introduced enough contradiction into the initial report that the officers could not move forward without more. Gerald Moss had already filed a motion to have the police report amended. The criminal case was stalled before it had fully started. I sat with that information for exactly as long as it took me to finish my coffee. Then I picked up the phone and called the attorney the hospital social worker had referred me to the morning before. A Memphis family law attorney whose name I had written on the inside cover of my journal before I left the hospital. I had not known then precisely when I would need her. I had known I would need her. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Can you be in my office in an hour?" I was there in 45 minutes. While I was sitting across from that attorney, Darnell was back at Greater Purpose for midweek prayer service. A neighbor who attended the church posted about it that afternoon. A photograph, a paragraph about a good man standing firm, a congregation surrounding one of their own against outside interference. The post moved through church networks the way those posts always do. By evening, it had been shared enough times that Franklin texted me a screenshot without comment. I read every word. I did not respond. What I had done that morning instead was file an emergency ex parte petition for temporary custody of Destiny. My attorney had built it on 3 pillars. The emergency room medical record from 2 nights ago, a Department of Children's Services report that Destiny's school counselor had filed 8 months earlier, and that had been closed without adequate investigation, and my journal. The family court judge reviewed it the same afternoon and granted the temporary order before close of business, pending a fuller hearing where everyone would have the right to be heard. Destiny was staying in Orange Mound. That was no longer a question. What I had not anticipated was how fast Gerald Moss would respond, or what he would respond with. It was not a defamation suit, which my attorney had warned me to prepare for. It was 2 simultaneous motions in family court. The first claimed I had removed Destiny from her legal residence without proper authority. The second was an application to restrict my contact with Kezia during the active proceedings. He was not defending Darnell. He was dismantling me. My attorney laid both documents on her desk and walked me through them with the measured efficiency of someone who had seen this particular strategy before. It was precise work. It was designed to consume time and money and energy while the criminal case sat stalled and Darnell continued to build his public narrative from the comfort of his own home. Then Franklin called. He had filed his own petition that morning, not for custody, but for formal legal recognition of his parental rights. 15 years of payment records attached. A biological father entering the legal frame with documented evidence of financial support was not something Gerald Moss had accounted for. My attorney was quiet for a moment when I told her. Then she said that complicated things considerably for the other side. It was the first good news in 2 days, but I did not let myself settle into it. I looked at the 2 motions still on my attorney's desk, the custody interference claim, the contact restriction, and I understood what Darnell had sent me. A message dressed up as legal paperwork, a reminder that he had resources and patience, and a man who knew exactly how to use both. My attorney said, "This is going to be expensive, and it is going to be long." I looked at her. "Then we'd better move faster than he is." Gerald Moss was good at his job. I understood that within 48 hours of his first filing, the custody interference motion had enough surface merit to require a formal response, which meant my attorney's time, which meant my money, which meant my attention divided between defending my right to protect my granddaughter and building the case that would put Darnell Pruitt where he belonged. That division was not accidental. It was the point. Franklin came to the house that morning with his phone in his hand. He did not say anything when he handed it to me. He just turned the screen toward me the way he had turned the payment records toward me 4 days ago, quietly, letting the thing speak for itself. It was a post on a neighborhood page, several thousand followers, the kind of page that Orange Mound Church networks treat as a community bulletin board. Darnell had given an interview. There was a photograph, him standing at Greater Purpose, surrounded by boys from his mentorship program, his hand resting on the shoulder of one of them. His expression in the photograph was the expression of a man carrying something he did not deserve to carry. I read the caption. I read the interview text beneath it. I read every comment in the section below. He talked about false accusations. He talked about a grandmother who had never accepted him, who had spent 5 years trying to undermine his marriage and his household. He talked about what it felt like to have your name attached to something you did not do. At one point in the interview, he said he had to stop to compose himself. The interviewer noted that he wiped his eyes. The comments were full of prayer hands, full of people who had sat beside this man in church for a decade, writing things like, "We know your heart," and "The enemy is busy," and "Stay strong, brother." People who had watched him mentor fatherless boys and could not make the distance between that man and the one being described in a police report. I handed the phone back to Franklin. Something shifted in me reading those comments. Not anger. I had moved past the temperature of anger, something colder and more permanent. A door closing inside me that I had been leaving slightly open without realizing it. The door that held the possibility that this would resolve itself without requiring everything I had. It was not going to resolve itself. I looked at my attorney's notes on the kitchen table. The custody interference motion, the contact restriction application, the stalled criminal case, Darnell back in his apartment, back in his church, back in the photograph with his arm around a boy whose father was not there. Everything I had built was real. The medical record, the journal, the emergency custody order, the DCS citation that named Charlene Odom's report, filed 8 months ago, closed without adequate investigation, closed over her written objection. My attorney believed that closure was improper, that if it could be demonstrated the report was closed without a required field visit, the entire timeline of this case changed. It meant the state had been told about Destiny 8 months before the basement and had looked away. That did not prove Darnell guilty. What it did was make the pattern harder to dismiss. It meant the concerns surrounding Destiny did not begin with me, the basement, or a family court petition. It meant someone outside the family had seen enough to report a problem months earlier. And that fact would be difficult for any defense attorney to explain away. But I had not moved on it yet. I had been waiting for the right moment, and I had not been certain what that moment looked like. That evening, Destiny came to the kitchen table with one of her sketchbooks. Not the ones the officers had taken, one she had kept at school, tucked in the bottom of her locker. She opened it without speaking and turned it toward me. A drawing, a basement door. Darkness pooled at the bottom. A thin line of light coming through the crack at the top. In the bottom corner, a date written in her small, careful handwriting. 2 years ago. Long before the night in the basement. Long before any police report. Long before anyone outside that apartment understood how trapped she already felt. I looked at the drawing for a long time, not because it predicted what would happen, because it showed that years before anyone listened, Destiny had already found a way to put her fear on paper. Then I picked up my phone and called Charlene Odom. She answered before the second ring. That told me something. A woman who answers her phone that fast at that hour either has insomnia or a conscience that has been keeping her awake. From what I came to understand about Charlene Odom, it was both. I told her who I was. I told her why I was calling. There was a brief silence on her end. Not the silence of someone deciding whether to engage, but the silence of someone who has been waiting for a specific conversation and is steadying themselves before it begins. She said, I kept everything. She told me about the session notes from 8 months ago, the DCS report number she had been given when she filed, the letter that came back weeks later closing the case as unsubstantiated, and the written objection she had submitted in response to that closure, a formal, documented objection, stating that the case had been closed without a home visit being conducted, without direct contact with the child, and against the counselor's professional assessment of risk. Nobody had ever acknowledged that objection. Not once. I listened to all of it, and I did not interrupt. When she finished, I told her I would have my attorney contact her formally. She said she would cooperate with whatever the legal process required. Her voice, when she said it, carried the specific weight of someone who has been carrying something they should have been able to put down months ago. My attorney reached Charlene the following morning. The subpoena was filed, and Charlene provided her full documentation package directly to the district attorney's office. Session notes. Report number, closure letter, written objection, all of it properly channeled through the correct legal process. What the DA's office received, when they laid all of it side by side, was not a grandmother's complaint against a deacon. It was a timeline, a medical record from the night of the incident, a journal spanning 5 years with dated, specific entries, sketchbook drawings evaluated by a licensed forensic professional, a formal police report, and underneath all of it, 8 months earlier, a school counselor who had seen enough to file a report that was closed without anyone setting foot in that apartment or speaking directly to Destiny. The state had been told. The state had looked away. That fact did not prove what happened in the basement. What it did was make the broader pattern harder to dismiss. It meant concerns about Destiny's safety had existed long before the night she texted me. It meant someone outside the family had documented those concerns months earlier. The failure belonged to the system. The significance belonged to the timeline. The district attorney's office reopened the investigation within the week. Investigators reviewed the full body of evidence, the medical record, Destiny's statement, the witness interviews, the physical evidence, and the newly obtained documentation from Charlene Odom. 2 days after that, a warrant was issued. Aggravated child abuse, false imprisonment of a minor. Gerald Moss called Darnell and advised him to surrender voluntarily. Darnell refused. I was not there on the Wednesday evening when the officers arrived at Greater Purpose. I heard about it the way you hear about things in Orange Mound, through a phone call, then another, then a text with a photograph attached. Officers at the door of the church. Midweek prayer service. The congregation inside. Darnell Pruitt was taken into custody in front of every person whose respect he had spent a decade cultivating. By morning, it was on the local news. A brief segment. His name. The charges. A photograph from the church directory used without permission by someone who had already decided the story was worth telling. Kezia saw it on her phone. I know, because she called me. I answered on the second ring. The same way Charlene had answered mine. Kezia did not speak immediately. I listened to her breathing on the other end of the line for what felt like a long time. Then she said, "Mama." A pause. "I need to talk to you." The diner was halfway between Orange Mound and the apartment, a place that belonged to neither of us, which was exactly why I chose it. Kezia was already seated when I arrived. I almost did not recognize her from the doorway. Not because she looked different in any dramatic way, but because something that had always been present in her bearing was gone. The certainty she carried, the particular set of her shoulders that said she had made her choices, and she was standing in them. It was absent. She looked smaller inside her own body. She had lost weight. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup she had not been drinking from. I sat down across from her. The waitress came. I ordered coffee. We waited until she left. Kezia said, "I didn't know it had gone that far." I let that sit for a moment. Then I reached into my purse and I took out my journal. I had marked the page before I left the house, the entry from 3 years ago. I opened to it and I read it aloud, the same way I had read it to Pastor Dawes 2 weeks earlier, in the same flat, unhurried voice. The locked room. 2 days. No food. The exact words Destiny had said to me, recorded the same night she said them. Kezia did not look up from the table while I read. She did not say it was exaggerated. She did not redirect the conversation. She sat with it in a way she had not been willing to sit with it 3 years ago when I came to her directly. I closed the journal. Then I told her about Franklin's payment records. I watched her face while I said it. 15 years of monthly transfers, birthday cards that came back, a call log he had kept because he always knew he might need to prove he tried. The records his attorney had provided showed he had not missed a single payment in 15 years, while Destiny grew up believing he had chosen to disappear. What moved across Kezia's face was not simple shame. It was something older and more complicated than shame. The expression of a woman who has been carrying a story for so long that having it taken apart in front of her feels like a kind of erasure. Like the thing she built her survival on has just been identified as the thing that caused the most damage. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I thought if she knew, she'd choose him over me." I did not respond immediately. I let those words occupy the space between us without rushing to fill it. Then I said, "She didn't get to choose, Kezia. You chose for her. And look what that choice built." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The flatness of it was the point. The truth delivered without heat, by the one person in Kezia's life she had never been able to dismiss, argue, past, or outlast. She looked at the table. She did not cry. She just looked at the table the way you look at something when you finally see it clearly and understand there is nothing left to say about it. We sat in silence for a while. When Kezia finally spoke again, her voice had changed, quieter, stripped of the defensive quality it always carried when we talked about her household. She told me Gerald Moss had asked her to testify as a character witness for Darnell. She had not given him an answer. She looked at me across the table and she said, "What do you think I should do?" I looked back at her. I think you already know. I drove home through Orange Mound as the evening settled in. Destiny was at the kitchen table when I came through the door. She looked up at me and said, "Grandma, can I have dinner with my father? Just us." I said yes, without hesitating. I watched her walk out the front door toward Franklin's car at the curb. I stood at the window after the car pulled away. The street was quiet. The porch light was on. I stood there for a long time. I am telling this part the way Destiny told it to me later that night, sitting at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had stopped drinking. She said the restaurant was small, a neighborhood place in Whitehaven, the kind with laminated menus and a woman who refills your water without being asked. Franklin had been going there for years. She could tell by the way the woman at the counter greeted him. He had chosen somewhere that was his, which Destiny said felt different from what she expected. She had expected neutral ground. Instead, he had brought her somewhere that showed her a piece of his ordinary life. She did not know what to do with that at first. They sat across from each other and neither of them spoke for long enough that the water got refilled twice. Franklin started. He told her about the payments, not the amounts, just that they had never stopped. He told her about the calls and what happened when he made them. He told her about the birthday cards and the year they started coming back, and the year after that when he stopped sending them. Not because he had given up on her, but because he had run out of ways to reach someone he had been told, by everyone around her, did not want to be reached. He did not name her mother. He did not name anyone. He simply told what happened in the order it happened. The way you tell something when you have been carrying it for a long time and you finally have the right person in front of you. Destiny listened, without interrupting. She had her father's stillness, which she did not know yet. When he finished, she said, "I used to think about what I'd say to you if I ever met you. I had a whole speech." Franklin said, "What did you want to say?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone deciding. The silence of someone who has already decided and is gathering the nerve to say the thing out loud. "I wanted to tell you that I turned out fine without you." Franklin did not move. "But I don't think that's true anymore." She paused. "I don't think I turned out fine at all. I think I just learned to act like it." He did not reach across the table. He did not offer a reassurance she had not asked for. He did not redirect towards something easier or reframe what she said into something less painful. He sat with it. He absorbed it the way something gets absorbed when there is no defense available and no defense is being attempted, completely and without flinching. That was the first real thing that passed between them, not the history, not the payments. That moment of him simply receiving what she said without trying to manage it. Destiny told me she did not know what she had expected from him. Something defensive, maybe. Something that would have made it easier to keep the distance she had been maintaining since the hospital waiting room. Instead, she got a man sitting across from her in a laminated menu restaurant in Whitehaven who let her truth land on him without moving. She said they talked for another hour after that. She did not tell me what they talked about. I did not ask. Franklin walked her to my front door just after 9. I was in the front room. I did not go to the window immediately. I gave them the porch. I heard his voice, low and even. "I'm going to be at the trial, every day, if that's all right with you." A pause. Destiny's voice. "Yeah, that's all right." The door opened and she came inside. I heard his footsteps on the porch for a moment before they moved back toward the car. Then I went to the window. He was still there, standing beside the driver's door, not quite ready to leave. Just standing in the quiet of my street in Orange Mound, with his hand on the roof of his car. I did not look away. Shelby County Criminal Court on a Tuesday morning has a particular quality of light, fluorescent and unforgiving. the kind that makes everything look exactly as serious as it is. I arrived early. I wanted to be seated before Darnell walked in. I wanted to watch him enter rather than have him watch me. He came through the door at 8:52 with Gerald Moss at his left shoulder. Dark suit, white shirt, a tie the color of a Sunday morning. He moved through the courtroom the way he had moved through everything, measured, unhurried. A man who had decided in advance that this room would not be the thing that undid him. Pastor Dawes was already in the gallery with 4 members of Greater Purpose seated beside him. They filled the 3rd row on the right side. Franklin was 3 rows behind me on the left. He had been there every morning since the trial began, the way he said he would be. We did not always speak when we arrived. His presence said what it needed to say without either of us adding to it. Gerald Moss gave the defense opening as if he were delivering a reasonable explanation for an unreasonable misunderstanding. A troubled teenager. A grandmother who had never accepted this marriage. A family dispute that had been catastrophically misrepresented by people with a personal grievance against a good man. He was skilled, and the argument was coherent. I listened to every word, and I wrote nothing down. I had already heard this version. I had been hearing it since the morning Darnell opened that apartment door for the police, looking dressed and calm. The prosecution presented the medical record. They presented selected journal entries. 7 of them, the same 7 I had read aloud to Pastor Dawes in my living room. They walked the jury through the DCS timeline, the report filed, the closure, the written objection, the reopened investigation. Then they called Charlene Odom. Gerald Moss had filed a motion before trial to limit what she could say, to keep her testimony narrow, confined only to the events of the night in question. The prosecution had fought it and won. The court ruled that Charlene could testify regarding her observations, her actions as a mandated reporter, and the records she created during the course of her professional responsibilities. She took the stand, and she told the truth in the same steady voice she had used on the phone with me weeks ago. She described the counseling session from 8 months before the basement. She described the concerns that led her to file a report. She described filing that report. She described the closure letter. She described the written objection she submitted, and the silence that followed it. The courtroom went quiet in a specific way, not the quiet of people losing interest. The quiet of people paying very close attention to something they understand matters. I was watching Darnell. His face did not change. His posture did not shift. He sat at the defense table with the same composed expression he had worn since the moment he walked in. But his left hand, which had been resting flat on the table in front of him, slowly closed into a fist. It was small. It was controlled. It was the only involuntary thing I had ever seen Darnell Pruitt do. Gerald Moss saw it too. He reached over without looking and placed his own hand on top of Darnell's. I opened my journal and wrote the time in the margin. The prosecution finished with Charlene, and the lead attorney turned to face the bench. The state calls Destiny Stokes. Gerald Moss was on his feet before the words finished. Recess request. Granted. The gallery shifted. I stepped into the hallway with the rest of them. I was passing the closed conference room door when I heard Darnell's voice through the wood. Low. Tight. Nothing like the calm voice he had carried into the courtroom. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough. Need to talk about a deal. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. For the first time since this trial began, Darnell Pruitt sounded like a man who understood exactly where he was. The plea negotiation lasted one morning and went nowhere. I was not in the room when it happened, but my attorney was. She called me during the recess and told me the prosecution had declined. The evidence was too substantial, and the district attorney had no appetite for leniency. After the closed DCS report had spent 2 weeks circulating through local news coverage. The question of why a counselor's written objection had been buried without acknowledgement was now a public conversation. That conversation had changed the temperature of everything. Darnell Pruitt would not be making a deal. He was going to trial. Destiny took the stand the following morning. I had watched her walk into difficult rooms before. The police station, the hospital, the counselor's office. Each time she had carried herself with a steadiness that I recognized as something she had built out of necessity rather than confidence. A thing you construct when the alternative is falling apart in a place that is not safe to fall apart in. This was different. She sat in that witness chair, and the composure she carried was her own, not a performance for someone else's comfort, not a strategy for managing someone else's mood. She was there to tell the truth in a room that was finely equipped to receive it, and she knew it. She described the night of the basement with precision, the argument at dinner, the door, the bolt sliding into place, the hours on the concrete floor in the dark. She described the pattern that preceded it. She was specific about dates, specific about incidents, specific about the particular quality of silence that fell over the apartment whenever Darnell's mood shifted. Gerald Moss cross-examined her for 40 minutes. He was skilled, and he was thorough, and he got nothing that helped him. Then, the prosecution introduced the sketchbooks. The forensic professional who had evaluated them took the stand first. Credentials established, methodology explained, findings presented. She testified that the drawings appeared consistent with the dates they were created and reflected recurring themes of fear, isolation, confinement, and loss of safety within the home. Then the drawings were shown to the jury, one by one, displayed on a screen at the front of the courtroom. I watched the jury while the drawings appeared. I watched faces change as they understood what they were looking at. Not proof of what had happened, but a contemporaneous record of how Destiny had experienced the world around her. Years of it. Careful and specific and hidden under a floorboard. The final drawing appeared on the screen. A closed basement door. Darkness gathered at the bottom. A thin line of light at the top. The date in the lower right corner. 2 years ago, written in Destiny's small, careful handwriting. 2 years before the night she testified about. 2 years before the police report. 2 years before anyone outside that apartment fully understood what she was carrying. The courtroom did not make a sound. Gerald Moss did not rise for redirect. There was nothing to redirect toward. The drawing had become part of a much larger body of evidence, one that stretched across medical documentation, witness testimony, counseling records, investigative findings, journal entries, and Destiny's own account. The jury deliberated through the following day and into the evening. The foreperson stood the next morning and delivered the verdict in a flat, clear voice. Guilty. Aggravated child abuse. Guilty. False imprisonment of a minor. Kezia was in the back row. She had been there every day of the trial, alone, arriving after everyone else and sitting where she could see without being easily seen. When the final drawing appeared on the screen, she had put her hand over her mouth. She had not left. When the verdict was read, Darnell turned in his chair. He did not look at his attorney. He did not look at the jury. He looked directly at me. I held his gaze. When the officers moved toward him, I looked away, not because he had taken anything from me, because I was already done with him. There was nothing left in that direction worth looking at. Outside on the courthouse steps, the afternoon light was flat and bright. Destiny found me at the bottom of the stairs and took my hand without saying anything first. Then she said, "I want to say something at Mama's hearing." I looked at her. "What do you want to say?" "I want to ask them not to send her to prison." I was quiet for a moment. The street was busy around us. Ordinary Memphis afternoon. "That's your right, baby," I said. "That's entirely your right." Darnell Pruitt received 7 years in the Tennessee Department of Correction. The judge read the sentence on a Thursday morning in the same courtroom where the verdict had been delivered. Gerald Moss had argued for leniency, first offense, community standing, the mentorship program. The judge listened to all of it and sentenced him to 7 years. Darnell received it the way he received everything, without visible reaction, composed until the officers led him through the side door and the door closed behind him. I did not watch the door close. I was already looking elsewhere. The DCS review of his mentorship program concluded 2 weeks after sentencing. The program was dissolved. The review found that his access to vulnerable households through the program had never been adequately supervised. That finding entered the public record and stayed there. Pastor Raymond Dawes read a formal statement to the congregation of Greater Purpose on the first Sunday of the following month. He acknowledged that the church had failed Destiny Stokes, that they had received information and had chosen mediation over action, and that choice had prolonged harm to a child they were obligated to protect. It was not enough. Nothing said from a pulpit was going to be enough. But he said it in front of the full congregation, and I was told it cost him something to do it, which meant it was real. Keziah's hearing was on a Wednesday. Destiny stood when the judge asked if anyone wished to address the court. She did not look at me before she stood. She had decided this on her own, and she was going to deliver it on her own. She told the judge she did not want her mother in prison, not because what her mother had done was forgivable or small, but because prison would give Keziah a structure to exist inside, a container for the consequences. And what Keziah needed was to live without that container, to wake up every morning inside the full weight of what she had chosen and what it had cost, with nothing institutional standing between her and that understanding. A 15-year-old girl said that to a judge in a Memphis courtroom, and the room was very still when she finished. The judge sentenced Keziah to 5 years probation and mandatory therapy. Keziah's parental rights had already been addressed in a separate family court proceeding, suspended, pending future petition, contingent on her compliance with treatment. She walked out of that courtroom without handcuffs. She walked out into the full, unmediated weight of her own choices. I watched her go. I did not follow. Franklin was recognized formally as Destiny's biological father that same week. He did not ask for custody. He asked for his name to be on the legal record and for the right to be present in her life going forward. Both were granted. He understood that presence was what he owed her. Not disruption, not compensation, just the steady, undramatic fact of showing up. I thought about Leroy Mercer once, briefly, the afternoon the last hearing closed. He was somewhere across this city, had been for 30 years. The first crack in a foundation that had taken 3 decades to fully give way. He had never answered for any of it. I held that thought for a moment. Then I put it down. Not forgiveness, release. I was 67 years old, and I was done carrying things that had stopped being mine to carry. The morning after the final hearing, I came downstairs before 6. Destiny was already at the kitchen table. A new sketchbook open in front of her, clean pages, nothing hidden in it, nothing that needed to be hidden. She was drawing something I could not see from where I stood at the stove. I did not ask what it was. I made coffee. I listened to the pencil moving across the page. Outside, Orange Mound was waking up. The light was coming through the window the way it always does in the early morning. Plain and unhurried, the same light that has come through that window for 39 years. I said 4 words that night, and I meant every one of them. You'll hear from me. I just didn't know then how much I'd have to hear too. About what I let go, about what I should have pushed harder on, about a man I misjudged and a daughter I thought I understood. I heard all of it. I'm still hearing it. But this morning, Destiny is at my table, drawing something new. And that right there is what those 4 words were always for.